Welcome back, everyone. In the next 30 minutes or so, I will introduce you to a methodology that will enable you to develop a stakeholder map and a stakeholder engagement exercise for the research or innovation project that you're currently working on or are planning to develop in the future. So this video is accompanied by a workbook that you can access via the link below, either on the HPP website or also on YouTube. And the workbook includes all the activities, the tables, and the questions that will be introduced in this video. And so the workbook and the video together will provide the resources that will enable you to use this methodology either independently for your own research project, for your own project, or also together with your research group or collaborating partners. But you can also use and apply this method in a seminar or in a classroom context. So what are the benefits and what can you actually gain by developing a stakeholder map and a stakeholder engagement exercise for your project? The first point is that it can help you to really understand the diverse perspectives and the diverse needs and concerns of the different persons, groups, or organizations, also other stakeholders that are either actively involved in the development of your project or maybe a little bit longer term that are likely to be affected by the innovation you develop or are involved in developing. But the methodology that we introduce here will also help you to connect with and to consult, to directly consult at least some of these stakeholders and to initiate processes of collaborative design or at least collaborative reflection. In addition, the methodology will also enable you to integrate insights from your mapping and engagement exercise in the development and planning of your research and innovation project. For example, by adjusting the aims or direction of your research, specifically with the needs or expectations of different types of key stakeholders, including societal actors, but also environmental stakeholders, or maybe future generation. The methodology that we introduce here consists of 4 steps. The first step is to select and define your project or the case that you want to use in order to develop a stakeholder map or stakeholder engagement exercise. And step 2 then is to actually develop a stakeholder map. Step 3 is to design a stakeholder engagement exercise and strategy. And step 4 is to implement the outcomes of the engagement exercise into the planning and design of your project. As I already mentioned, this video is accompanied by a workbook, and each of these 4 steps is in quite some detail explained and illustrated in the accompanying workbook. And the workbook does also contain the tables and the questions and activities that we discuss in this video. Okay, I wanted to quickly share the workbook with you. So here is the workbook, and you see that on page 1, you have the 4 different steps that were just introduced. And in this document, each step is then explained in detail. So the document contains clear guidance to develop the stakeholder map and the engagement exercise on your own, independently at home or wherever you are, or also you can do it together with colleagues or research partners, or as I said, also in a classroom context. To quickly run through, so you see, just to give you an idea, selection of case studies. So there are a number of, there's some guidance, and there are guiding questions also, and there is a template diagram that shall inspire you to identify the stakeholders that are relevant in the context of your project. And then we have a clear methodology with various activities, various tables that have to be completed in order to really develop a coherent strategy that you can implement in practice. A first step is to select a project or a case that you can use as a basis for your stakeholder map and stakeholder engagement exercise. Now, preferably or most logically, that would be your own research or innovation project, or maybe also a planned project that you develop, for instance, in the context of a research proposal. Alternatively, if you are not a scientist yourself, but maybe a social scientist, and then you can simply choose an innovation or a technology that interests you, and you use this as a basis for reflection in the context of this methodology. Now, an important point in this regard is that the more specific you are, the better. Ideally, do not choose a broad area, technology area, such as biotech or artificial intelligence, but focus on specific applications. For example, the use of AI for spatial navigation in autonomous flying micro robots. Now, this is quite specific, and you can then still, you could, for instance, also define a specific application area where these micro robots shall be used, and this would enable you to quite clearly identify key stakeholders that are involved or that are likely to be affected by this technology. And then to develop a clear stakeholder engagement strategy. In the next slide, I will show you how to develop a stakeholder map. So please also take a look at pages 3 and 4 of the workbook. This provides clear guidance and a draft template that will help you to develop a stakeholder map specifically for your project. Now, before getting into practical details, a brief definition of the term stakeholders and a few examples. Now, stakeholders can really be anyone involved in the research and innovation process or affected by it, at all stages of an innovation pathway and during the whole life cycle of innovative technologies or products. For example, think about the development of an innovation or a technology application or a specific product. Think about the piloting and testing of it. Think about large-scale manufacturing. Think also about the everyday use of a new invention. And then at a later stage of a life cycle, think about waste management, recycling, or decomposition. At each of these stages in the life cycle of an innovative technology or products, different types of stakeholders are likely to be involved and or likely to be affected, either positively or often also negatively. And it is therefore important to identify stakeholders in relation to each of these stages. Now, stakeholders can be, for example, persons, groups, communities, but they can also be future generations. They can be organizations such as companies, NGOs, funders, but also shareholders. But stakeholders can also be non-human stakeholders. They can be plants or animals. They can be natural resources, air quality, water systems, or ecosystems. So stakeholders can be human and non-human. On page 4 of the workbook, you find the following draft diagram. Now, this shall serve as a template for you to reflect on the different types of stakeholders that are involved or that will be affected by your research or innovation. The template here, as you see, provides already a few ideas of possible stakeholders, but these shall mainly serve as an inspiration. The aim of this activity and the aim of using this diagram is that you actively revise the diagram and the different categories, and that you actively add stakeholders that are not mentioned in the diagram, but also that you can delete those stakeholders that are not relevant for your research. Now, the diagram here on this slide and also in the workbook, it shall facilitate identification of stakeholders in 7 areas. And these include, for instance, societal stakeholders. Who are the key societal stakeholders involved or affected by your innovation or invention? Who are the key environmental stakeholders? But also, there are also other categories such as who are the stakeholders involved in the production or the waste management, or maybe affected by production or waste management. So who are stakeholders involved in the funding and financing, or who are stakeholders that financially benefit from your project, and also which type of regulatory bodies or regulatory stakeholders exist. Now, please note, it's really important that these categories shall only serve as a starting point, more as an inspiration to think with. Not all of these categories may apply to your project, and you may come up with other categories and stakeholder groups that are actually very relevant in the context of your work. So please actively modify, rename existing categories and/or add other categories. If you have completed the previous activity and you have developed a stakeholder map, you can now continue with the development of a stakeholder engagement exercise for your project. It involves 3 different activities. So first of all, you select the stakeholders that shall be included in the engagement exercise. And the next activity is then to develop a stakeholder engagement plan, which includes the development of the aims or the issues and questions that you want to discuss with different stakeholders, but also the selection of the different methods that you use in order to develop a stakeholder strategy, and also questions around finance and the timing of a stakeholder engagement exercise and so on. And then the third activity is to actively implement the stakeholder engagement exercise and make it happen in practice. So now we will run through each of these points in more detail. On page 6 of the workbook, you find the following table here on this slide. So based on the completed stakeholder diagram, which can easily include like 30 to 50 stakeholders, if you have really invested some time and thought about it, I recommend that you select here maybe 8 to 15 or maybe more stakeholders that you think should really be included in the multi-stakeholder engagement strategy that you would like to develop for your project. So as a first step, please transfer the names of these stakeholders in the left column of the table. And then in the other 2 columns, you can clarify why is engagement for each of these stakeholders important. And then in the column on the left, you can clarify or think about how consultation and dialogue with these stakeholders can actively benefit or positively influence the innovation process. Okay, activity 2 is to develop the stakeholder engagement plan. On page 7 of the workbook, you find the following table here. So in order to develop a stakeholder engagement plan, please answer the questions that are introduced here on the left column. Now, these questions aim to provide clarity on various issues. Now, for example, they aim to provide clarity on the purposes that you hope to achieve with your engagement strategies. Now, what are the aims? What would you like to achieve with it? But these questions also will provide clarity on the issues or the questions or the specific concerns that you would like to explore with some of the selected stakeholders. Another extremely important point, obviously, is to think about the methods and also the activities and the forms of data collection that you would like to use in order to reach out to, in order to learn from and consult and engage with the different types of stakeholders that you interact with. But these questions here, you can take your time and read through them one by one. They also address various practical issues such as the resources, the financial resources that you need to conduct the exercise. Okay, now I would like to speak in more detail about the methods and activities to achieve stakeholder involvement, because this is obviously a critical part, and that's why I have the next slide here. So in order to facilitate the selection of methods and activities for your stakeholder engagement exercise, I've provided here an overview of different options. Now, this table here, the table that you see here is also in the workbook on page 8. Now, the methods that you see here, they include, for example, easier to achieve and less costly strategies, such as the organization of a roundtable discussion or the organization of public meetings or workshop. Also, the setting up of an interdisciplinary advisory board that would bring in people with different types of expertise and different perspectives that could surely be useful for your project. But they also include more elaborate procedures such as focus groups or also questionnaires and surveys, which require quite a little bit of expertise on how to do this, and often they're also more costly. A link to a more comprehensive guide that provides more detailed explanation of the different methods is in the link below, here in this slide, but it is also in the workbook. Okay, now implementing the strategy. Once your plan is in place, once your plan has been developed and your methods have been selected, you can then start to actively implement your engagement strategy. And I cannot say much about it here because implementation will really depend on the plan that you're developing. Okay, let's close this presentation with a brief elaboration on the fourth and final step, the use and integration of the outcomes of your engagement exercise in the design and planning of your own research and innovation project. Now, the key question here is really how to continue once your stakeholder engagement exercise has been completed. And in order to facilitate this process, I've listed here a number of guiding questions. And these questions, they can also be found in the workbook on page 9. Now, these questions include, for example, how can the findings from the stakeholder engagement exercise inform decisions on the design, the direction, or the development of your planned innovation or the planned technology or application or product? And also, how can I address or mitigate or raise awareness of possible risks or potential problematic effects that the engagement exercise may have brought to light? Another question is, how can my research and innovation respond to and or navigate the possibly conflicting expectations or values, maybe also conflicting concerns that different stakeholders may have expressed? What role do the expressed concerns play in the context of the further development of your project? Can they be addressed in one way or the other? Can the direction of the research be changed in order to circumvent or to prevent these concerns? There's a variety of other questions also. And I think one question is especially that is really important is, which additional forms of knowledge and maybe also which additional forms of interdisciplinary research or consultancy are required in order to address or also deepen understandings of the issues or the question that the stakeholder engagement exercise has raised. And how can I realize these follow-up activities? And I say this because often, a stakeholder engagement exercise is really only the start of a longer process of exploration. Stakeholder engagement is typically an ongoing process, and stakeholders may have to be reconsulted at a later stage, for instance, once a specific product or application has been developed, but maybe also other additional stakeholders have to be consulted. For this reason, I've included the final question here, which is, should there also be additional engagement activities with stakeholders that participate or will be affected by my project? And if yes, when, with whom, and for which purposes exactly? So these questions, they form at least an entry point for reflection. And of course, you can add your own question or reformulate these questions here. But we hope that they form an entry point in order to really think about how can insights from your stakeholder engagement be integrated into the further development and the planning of your research and innovation project. Okay, we have reached the end of this introduction and training, and I hope that you find the materials presented here useful and also that you can use them as a resource in your current or emerging work. Thank you very much for your attention, and if you have any questions, please drop me an email.